if we think about the landscape of AAC apps, they are really in a whole variety of different categories. And so we have those apps that are really developed primarily for generative language, for expressive communication. Those that were developed maybe more for basic communicative functions, and a lot of those were the ones that came out for more requesting and choice making. And we saw a lot of those early on. A lot of them were developed by people outside fields related to language particularly, so they have a different sort of structure and thought and process about how language is represented and what language is contained within it. And then there are AAC-related apps for the assessment area, and a growing number of AAC apps for actual intervention, for language practice, for language learning. And the other AAC-related apps that we tend to use quite a few of are geared toward building independence in that individual and also developing materials. So for the most part, we are going to be talking about these first three areas. But if you have interest in any of the others, I'm sure any one of us could provide information or answer questions. There are quite a few that are for those basic communicative functions, and relatively fewer that are for the generative language that, as a speech-language pathologist, we were very, very hungry to get our hands on. But now there are several, and there are several very good ones, and it's what's been very gratifying recently in the past year is to see expressive generative language communication apps come out that are more than just variations on a theme, right? Because when you have new technology or new software, or in our case, new apps, a lot of times what comes out is somebody's version of something that somebody else did, and it looks very similar, and there are distinctions, and it might do something a little bit different than what the original app did, but doesn't offer, let's say, a set of features or an organization system for language that is remarkably different than what was already in the marketplace. And that has really changed in this past year or so, and that's really very exciting. So there are several of those, but still I would say the lion's share of the AAC-related apps are in that category of, basic choice making, requesting, that sort of thing. I'll talk a little bit about AAC apps for assessment purposes. There are only a very few of those. I think we'll probably be seeing more of them as time goes on, as will the ones that are geared more for therapy and teaching specific skills and tracking data and that sort of thing. The other one I wanted to mention that a lot of the folks that I work with don't know too much about is that there are some very good apps out there now for materials development, right? So for making AAC materials that then eventually kind of get printed out and used in a no-tech way, the way we might do with a board maker. Those are have been very helpful to a lot of the folks with whom we work. So when we're thinking about selecting an AAC app for an individual, I certainly view it as being something that is part of a much larger process. And so here, that context that we're going to very much advocate for is the complete AAC evaluation. And in that comprehensive AAC evaluation, which in a perfect world is multidisciplinary and looks at the individual from many different angles and looks at many different domains, that will look at whether or not they need something external to their body to support their communication, and if that is the case, whether that external thing should involve some technology. It doesn't for all people, of course. Some folks do better than without technology, and I would say that thinking in terms of etiologies, I've worked with many, many kids who did much better, and these are kids with Angelman syndrome, and they tended to do better with unaided things than they did with aided things. I mean, each one had a role, but in terms of measuring their language and their linguistic performance, they did better with some of the unaided things. Now, I think that's largely a function of